I never knew that I needed a story where Captain America goes to hell and teams up with Doctor Doom, and it's pretty dope. So this story takes place in the aftermath of Captain America issue number 11, and the only thing you really need to know is that as part of the lead up to Armageddon, Red Hulk literally beat Steve Rogers within an inch of his life and almost killed him. And so the result of this is that Steve Rogers is currently in a hospital, but for reasons that were not originally explained, but are explained here, Captain America's soul, essentially, ends up in hell. And so when he shows up here, he's immediately met by Doctor Doom and someone else. And his whole thought is like, this is not real. Like, there's no way that I'm down here in hell with Doctor Doom. Because the instant he sees Victor Von Doom, the only conclusion he can draw is that he's in hell. Why would Doctor Doom go to heaven? You know what I mean? And if he were in heaven, it certainly wouldn't look like this, right? And that's where Victor just tells him, you're correct on one part, Captain, and decidedly wrong about the other. This is the underworld, the netherworld, Hades. It goes by different names. This is hell, and yet you live. And so Steve Rogers will give us this kind of monologue over the course of the story where he says his posture, his demeaning tone. This is Victor Von Doom. There's no doubt that it's actually him. So it's us basically being told, right, by Chip Zdarsky, this is really Doom, where it's not some kind of a ruse or anything like that. And so that's why Steve says, and if it is Doctor Doom, then he's playing some kind of a game. And so that's where Doom introduces Veritok and says, our friend here was raised in a more inhibited and cast time. And so at that point, Doom says, Captain, you are not dead, but you are on the brink, lying in a coma, struggling to breathe. Weak, your soul itching to cross over into the next realm. My time as Sorcerer Supreme taught me much, and one of those things was how to bind my silver cord, the invisible thread that connects one's body and soul to another. Upon death, that cord gets severed, but Doom wielded it and attached it to your soul. How surprised was I when you pulled at my line so soon after my death, ready to be reeled in to Doom. Now, the other side of this statement, right, because the way that Doom presents it is, I anchored your soul to my soul. So basically, when the time came that you would pass on for whatever reason, I can yank you into this realm of hell. The other side of this is potentially Dr. Doom anchored his soul to Steve Rogers so he would have a way back, right? That's one way to look at it. But that's the crazy thing about this is because Steve Rogers says, if this is a game, it's a game I intend to win. And so that's where Veritok just kind of like manifests this crazy demonic form and just shouts to leave Dr. Doom alone. And so Steve looking at this is just like, it's some sort of demon. Well, let's just assume, real or not, demons have a solar plexus. Leave it to Steve Rogers to be sent to hell and to just start pummeling demons with his bare hands. That's the most Captain America thing that I think I've ever seen, right? You know, freedom punches for everyone. I love this. Like, this is absolutely phenomenal. This is absolutely phenomenal. And so that's where Veritok says, Doom is our savior, right? But the crazy thing about this is that when Captain America punches Veritok, the punch burns. And so the question is, why does Steve Rogers' punch burn in a place like this? And that's where Dr. Doom starts filling in the gaps. You are a pure soul, a naive man whose naivety somehow translates to noble in the erroneous cosmic table. You, Captain, are to be Doom's protector and deliverer, my champion. And that's where Steve is like, right there, that's the game. Right, that is the game. He brought me here to be his protector, right? There's always a reason for why Doom does things. Dr. Doom is not a like charitable and giving person. There's always a reason he does. I mean, a good example of this, right? Christophe Renard. You could look at the idea of Doom adopting Christophe Renard and say, oh, yeah, his mom was killed by one of my old Doom bots when some rebel guy seized control of my country after I was defeated by the Fantastic Four, right? And so I'm going to adopt this child because I feel guilty over the fact that one of my old robots robots destroyed his mother, right? Killed her. But that's not really what happened. It was Doom doing it to satisfy his own guilt, not because Christoph legitimately needed someone to take care of him. Doom's almost always selfish, right? He almost always does things for his own self-interest. And for someone like Steve Rogers, even if he doesn't know Dr. Doom inside and out, he knows him well enough to know that that is a true thing. And so that's where the statement's made. The ruler of this realm, Mephisto, seeks to destroy me for past insults. And if one dies here, they simply cease to exist. And so he says, this is a realm of evil and torture. Doom does not deserve this, nor does Hell's other denizens like Veritok here. And so that's where Veritok says, an uprising is simmering, on the verge of exploding, and Victor here is its spark. Now, that happens a lot more often than you would think in Mephisto's realm. I mean, you would think that for a Fear Lord, he would have far more control over what's happening in his own realm, especially considering the fact that Mephisto's power is always at its highest when he's in his own realm. But the reality here is that Hell is a kind of place of chaos. Keeping in mind, this is one of a multitude of Hell dimensions that exist out there. Although one of the things that we are going to see is that Chip Zdarsky is almost going to kind of pitch this idea. This is the only version of Hell that exists in Marvel Comics. That's not true, but it's kind of being made to look that way. But the fact is, Dr. Doom says, my powers are not what they once were, Captain, nor is my outlook. These creatures and people need help, a light to guide them against the ultimate evil. You shall be that light. And so Steve says, Victor, I know this makes little sense considering our situation, but go to hell. But that's what I'm talking about when I say it's the idea of like the only real hell, right? The ultimate evil. I mean, sure, truth to tell, Mephisto has historically been presented to us as effectively Satan within Marvel Comics. In fact, before Mephisto actually had a name, he was considered Satan within Marvel Comics. But more recently, if you look at something like Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk, right, you learn that there is a one below all. The true, ultimate evil of the Marvel Universe, and really the multiverse, which is simply just the result of what happens when the one above all develops a dark counterpart, right? When the one above all hulks out, so to speak, because it was all part of the Hulk mythos. But the fact that Mephisto predates the concept of the one below all by decades within Marvel Comics really kind of points to the idea that Marvel is focusing on him as the ultimate evil, because while you do have beings like Satanish and so on and so forth, again, Mephisto has always kind of held that title of being Satan, the absolute evil of the Marvel Universe. And that's when you switch over to him, right? Because he says, I am unhappy and I am displeased. Like a child who has lost his toy, I am inconsolable. And of course, in speaking to Janlox, he says, Lord Mephisto, we have legions scouring the realm. No cesspit shall remain unturned until this human soul is found. And that's where Mephisto simply says, he is more than human. He is a human who has played at being a god, insufferable, arrogant, somewhat earned. He has cheated me before, and now, finally, I will not rest until Victor Von Doom's soul is splayed out before me in ribbons of pain. But that's the crazy thing, is because in the midst of all of this, he also notices there's a new soul, one so bright that even Doom cannot hide them, and realizes it's Captain America. Now, the relationship between Doom and Mephisto is really cool. It is really interesting, right? The whole relationship initially started with Doom's mother, right? The idea that Cynthia had made a deal with Mephisto not knowing what she was doing. And once she died, her soul became the property of Mephisto, right? Triumph and Torment, that iconic story where Dr. Doom and Dr. Strange go to hell to free Cynthia Von Doom's soul from Mephisto. And ever since then, Mephisto's always kind of like had a vendetta against Doom. Up until that point, he found Doom more amusing than anything else. Like, sure, we could strike this bargain where like once a year you can fight to free your mother's soul, but watching Doom fail all the time and watching the misery he endured as a result of that failure was always just kind of entertaining. Like watching Sisyphus try to push the boulder up the hill only for it to get near the top and then to fall back down again. But when Doom succeeded, Mephisto felt robbed, and he's always had a vendetta against Doom ever since. But the idea that Steve Rogers is this pure soul who's in hell now, the prospect of converting Steve, right? Basically corrupting him, turning him to evil, torturing him, right? That brings a level of satisfaction to Mephisto that he otherwise wouldn't get. Like you or I chowing down on the greatest ribeye steak, cooked medium rare to ever be created, because why would you eat it any other way? And so that's why Steve says, yesterday I was breathing, fighting monsters with twisted ideas about democracy. And now I don't know what I am. A soul? I don't breathe, yet I smell the sulfur on the winds. I'm in hell. And he's kind of flabbergasted by that, right? And he says, it hits me square in the chest as the demon buzzes around my head. My friends, Sharon, I may never see any of them again. But as he's walking through this place, right, kind of moving away from Dr. Doom, whatever influence or control he may have, and Steve is kind of pondering, right, what he's gonna do next. The world itself starts working against him, right, literally ensnared by the ground, being pulled down, that kind of thing, because when you're dealing with the realm of Mephisto, it's not just whatever demons happen to be around there. All of reality in this place is some form of torture, and it will torment you. And so that's why he's shocked by it and says, it's me, right? I feel crushed, sinking. I'm letting this happen, but I cannot let this place drag me down. I am not dead. Somewhere out there, I breathe, and Thunderbolt Ross still walks, endangering the people of Latveria. And notice that, right? He just kind of like grabs a chain and frees himself. Now, it's not to simply say that he somehow has been granted magical abilities that let him overpower the realm of hell. He does have enchantments, right? Enhancements to his power. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But it really is just Steve Rogers' resolve that's allowing him to move through this place. And that's where he ends up coming across a guy out there being feasted on by ravens. And this man just kind of like begs for reprieve, right? Like, please, I just need a moment of nothing, right? And that's where Steve, of course, comes running up there and basically, starts to free this guy. And that's where the guy asks the question, right? Why would anybody do this? Are you here to hurt me, right? Because this guy's been tormented for so long. It's all he knows, right? The appearance of a person is there to wreak havoc. And the reality here is that while Steve Rogers is kind of like this bright light of goodness in the world, and really even in the realm of hell itself, it would be the exact kind of thing Mephisto would do, right? To like appear to this man and say, oh, I am here to help you, right? I'm here to save you. And then ultimately continue tormenting him, right? Just as a way to destroy any hope he had of being rescued, and then break him down even on the most fundamental level, for nothing more than the fact that Mephisto would just enjoy it. And that's where you end up finding out this guy, he says, my wife, my boy, she told me not to drive. And he says, you need to run from this place. Get out of here as fast as you can, because the torture is showing back up here. And he says, look at this, right? I hope that your respite was good, human. I find that without those moments, the punishment lacks teeth. Giving you a moment to relax makes the pain even worse, because now you started to believe that it's going to end. But then you realize that it's not. But then this guy looks down and sees Steve and is like, who do we have here? Right? Like a flesh soul begging for Azraphon's whip, right? And that's where Steve just says, I'm in hell. This is what hell is supposed to be, isn't it? Right? Torture, pain, suffering all the time. But that's not who I am, because Steve just starts pummeling this guy. Now again, the fact that he's able to demonstrate a level of strength that allows him to start pummeling and defeating these demonic beings, all of whom are exceedingly powerful in this realm, even if they don't have like reality warping abilities, right? Strength and speed and whatnot, it shows there's some kind of divine intervention here. And so Steve ends up grabbing the chains and breaking them of this man being tormented. And he says, I don't deserve this. And Steve just tells him, I don't know you, and I don't know what you deserve. All I know is it's not this. What's your name? My name is Steve. And this guy says, it's Terry, right? Is this some kind of a trick? This feeling, I have not felt kindness for quite some time. And if you're real, if this is real, I've existed for so long with nothing but guilt and pain. I ended my life, but it kept going here. I need to make it worth something again. And that's when Doom shows up here and says, that's why you're here, Steve, right? To give these souls a chance at redemption, at controlling their own destinies. So sure, there is some kind of a ruse here with Dr. Doom, and we don't quite know what it is, but maybe there's not, right? Maybe it really is the desire of Doom to basically lead a revolution to overthrow Mephisto and to in turn put someone else in his place. And because Steve Rogers Rogers is who he is, right? A true, noble, honorable soul. He is the kind of person to travel through here and to start converting people away from this life they've known for so long under Mephisto and into something better. Now, does it mean that hell will become a paradise? No, of course not. Absolutely not, right? This realm is what it is. But just because it is what it is doesn't mean it has to be as dark as it is. And that's what Dr. Doom says, right? Terry looks at him and says, "You're the one that they've been talking about, the one who fights for us." And Doom says, "I am. And it would seem so is this man." And he says, "Rogers, we have been on opposing sides many times, but neither of us can stand by and watch this level of unnecessary suffering." And that's where Steve just says, "You're right." Right? He initially focuses on the people that he loves and cares about back in the real world and trying to find a way back. But when he says that, right, like you need to focus on getting out of hell, to save Latveria, to stop Ross, he also looks and says, "You're right. These people need help." Now, this is not Steve Rogers losing himself. I want to make that clear. He's not succumbing to the effects of hell. This is Steve Rogers recognizing the fact that yes, he needs to get out of here, but until he does, why not do some good in this place? And that's really a testament to the nature of Steve, right? This almost incorruptible person, so much so that even in this just torturous realm, he will do the right thing and try to help people where he can, when he can. And so that's where Doom says, "And then there were 4. And so at that point, they continue on this journey. And Steve asks, "Where are we headed?" And he's told by Veritalk, "We need more willing souls if we're to fend off Mephisto. We are going to the Gray Valley to find the home of Torvaz the Preacher, a demon who has rebelled against torture, who instead preaches to his congregation about new ways forward. Much like myself in Doom, he's in danger for his beliefs, and those beliefs will lead to war, one that we need to win." And so that's why I say this kind of things happened before. Sometimes it was just like Mephisto being ousted from his own realm. But the idea that there's a guy here who is leading a conflict, right, leading a rebellion within hell, it's pretty dope. And so Steve asked the most logical question here. What are you hoping for if you win? And that's where he's told, right? Hell is for the ones who have done wrong, who have turned away from the light. But why should this be the end for them? Right now, we lie under a dictator's thumb, someone who does not want us to change, who wants us to exist in fear and pain. I want us to control our destinies, to give us a chance to return to the light. And even if we cannot do that, to become better than what we are. And so Steve asks, and where does Doom play into all of this? Because back on Earth, he was a murderer, an egomaniac, a dictator, not unlike what you are fighting against. And Steve is told, Doom saved me. I was in the depths of hell, being flayed by ancient demons, and he saved me. I know you feel that you know him, but in that moment, I saw into his soul and saw nobility and a belief in what's right. And that's where Doom appears. And he says, these souls need help, and Doom will not see them suffer any longer under Mephisto's yoke. It is true that I need him to be brought low in order for me to return to Earth, to my rightful home, but leaving this place in better hands, and Veritalk's hands, is the right thing to do. Now, shall we brave the Gray Valley? So, here's the interesting thing about this, right? This is what makes this kind of intriguing. What really is the ulterior motive of Doom? He never does anything for a good reason, right? So it is entirely possible here, because keep in mind, when Cynthia Von Doom's soul was freed, because of the fact that Doom had betrayed Stephen Strange and handed Stephen Strange over to Mephisto as part of this grand scheme, right? Willing to barter the soul of another to free his mother, that when his mother was freed, right, basically presented by Mephisto, and in learning what Doom had done, she had turned against Doom, right? Rebuked him, her own son, because he had engaged in such an extreme act of betrayal. In that moment, she redeemed herself. And that's the reason why her soul was able to go to heaven. Is that what Doom is doing here? Is Doom literally orchestrating a circumstance in all of his knowledge where he essentially launches a rebellion against Mephisto, and in doing so demonstrates he doesn't truly deserve to be here? Or is it simply just that, like, yeah, man, Mephisto's an asshole, dude's gotta go, right? That's one of those crazy things. And of course, we'll find out as time goes on, but still, Steve Rogers, in the face of all of this, asks himself some very important important questions. Dictators, rebellion. After Latveria, is Doom finally ready to do the right thing? Am I ready to unseat the devil? And so in the face of all of this, knowing that Dr. Doom and Captain America are out there, Mephisto sends two individuals to track them down. The first one is someone named Frenza, right? A new introduction here to the mythos. However, if you have read this comic, you actually know who this person is. The second one is, of course, Red Skull, because why would Schmidt be anywhere other than hell? Of course he was sent here. And so at that point, we switch over to Torvaz, right? As this dude is just like fleeing for his life within Mephisto's realm, being chased down by a couple of demons. The idea being that once they capture him and take him to Mephisto, perhaps Mephisto will grant them some kind of a boon or let them consume his flesh or just something like horrible, right? Horrible and horrifying. But fortunately, Captain America and Doom show up here, right? And like basically defeat these guys. The other thing about this though, and this is kind of an adaptation that Steve Rogers is going to have to understand, right? Get with the program type thing. What ends up happening is Doom destroys one of the demons. And Captain America initially doesn't like that, right? He says, Victor, you killed them, right? And Victor just says, it would appear that I have. And Steve says, these used to be people. Killing them here means they're gone forever. And where Doom responds with his normal, kind of rhetoric, this is war, Captain, and Doom does not intend to take prisoners, Veritok responds here, right? And Veritok says, there's something you need to understand. We should try to convert as many as we can to our cause. But the reality here is that some individuals are too far gone to save. They cannot be brought back. And in that instance, the only thing we can do is destroy them. Now, this is not brutality. This is not just like dark and twisted stuff. No. This is the reality of the world that Steve Rogers is in right now. Not everyone can be saved. And in the face of that, the only way to navigate this world is that some individuals are going to have to be destroyed. It sucks, but that's the way that it goes. But in the midst of all of this, where Terry initially approaches, Torvaz, and it's like, oh, my name's Terry, it's truly an honor. He's just like, whatever, man, who's this guy? Right? Like, he just kind of guffs Terry and he's like, who's this guy? Right? Like, your soul shines like a beacon in this place. The prophecies are true. A Messiah to lead us out of the fiery pits. And the funny thing about this is that Steve Rogers does exactly what you would expect a Messiah to do. I assure you, I am not that guy, but I am here to help. Because the reality here is there's merit to the statement. Those who are best suited for power are those who don't seek it out, who aren't looking to have all this power, control, influence, or whatever. They really are the best ones for that. And Steve Rogers is exactly that guy. He's not looking for fame. He's not looking for money, right? He's not chasing power or anything like that. He's just a guy out here in the world doing his thing. And in this particular instance in hell, it's standing up for the innocent, right? It's standing up for people who are being tormented unnecessarily. And so that's why Torvaz tells him, you may not see yourself as a Messiah. That's fine. But the reality is that my flock may disagree with that, right? There's no time to waste, right? Let's head to the Midland fires before the demons return, right? A safe place. And that's what's interesting is that in following these people, Captain America says we walk for days, weeks maybe, right? It's impossible to say here. Torvaz is slick, but feels genuine as he leads us to his secret camp. I can handle genuine, but I cannot handle slick. We need his followers to unseat the pure evil at the head of hell. So I go along, but I will not be roped into his story. Now, it does kind of feel manipulative. Right, that's what Steve is talking about here. But again, how much of this is due to what it takes to survive in this place and is due to the fact that Torvaz is somehow duping everybody. But when they end up getting back to the secret base, no doubt protected with enchantment and so on, so that Mephisto and his guys can't find it, right? His flock welcomes him back and he says, my children, I escaped with my soul, but just barely. These heroes of our movement, beacons, came to my rescue. And of course, the question is asked, who are these guys? And one of them says, salvation, my friend. And he says, the time has come. This place, these tortures are no longer to be handed down to us from Mephisto. The prophecies that I envisioned are coming true. We will govern ourselves with an eye toward redemption, toward betterment. And so Steve is caught in this intense quagmire. He asks, am I doing the right thing? God put these souls here to be tortured, but he also put me here, surely not to ignore what's going on, right? That's the quagmire, because one of the things to be aware of is that Steve doesn't fully understand the realm of Mephisto. More often than not, when you are stuck in Mephisto's realm, it's usually because you made a deal with Mephisto. And in making that deal, Mephisto will give you what you're asking for with a caveat, right? So, you'll ask Mephisto for $1 billion. He'll give you $1 billion, but you won't be able to spend it. It'll be like locked away somewhere that you can't access, right? Or something along those lines. And then once you die, by whatever manner and whatever means, Mephisto collects your soul. But again, this is where I say, Chip Zdarsky looks like he's shifting things up, because if Mephisto really is just a fear lord out here manipulating the souls of individuals, and his realm is now a place where you go when you die because you engaged in a life of wickedness, then that basically means that Steve Rogers is kind of operating as like a divine soldier in this realm. And that's where Dr. Doom chimes in and says, do you not wish to hear the preacher exalt you and your quote-unquote noble soul? And the response of Steve, I'm sure the prophecies that Torvaz tells his flock are the result of his grandiose ego, even if the results are toward a good cause. And so he asks, tell me, Victor, you took over the world, and I believe a part of you did it to make the world a better place, but you also took away people's freedom, their ability to collectively decide on their own futures. Do you have regrets? Is this you making amends? And Dr. Doom just says, Doom does not believe in regrets. There is no person more suited to lead our planet than myself. The flaws of our world's leaders and their followers will forever threaten mankind, and democracy is tainted with immalleable idiocy. That being said, what transpires here is not right. I have been a god before, Rogers, and I would not allow this on my worst day. Mephisto must be unseated, and I believe Veritok is the one to take his place. And so Steve asks, by vote or by force? And the response of Doom is interesting here. He says, these creatures are incapable of democracy. The best they can hope for is a gentler hand on the wheel. We need to put Veritok on the throne. She will be a compassionate ruler, even if she needs to do so with an iron fist. She will rule from righteousness, not ego, and she will grant us leave of this place. I have only one concern, and I assume you see it as well. And that's where Steve says, I do. And so in that moment, Torvaz shows up here and says, you shy away from the spotlight, lending even more credence to your pedigree as a messiah. And Steve, again, rejects it, right? I am not here to be what you want me to be, Torvaz. And he says, I am just a man willing to fight for what's right. And so again, right, Torvaz chimes in. Of course, right, my flock has agreed to be the beginning of your army, but to truly defeat Mephisto, we need a weapon. And this is not going to be an easily accessible one. We need something called the anti-divine, a weapon to slay angels in the battle between heaven and hell. And so once they teleport to what's called the Devil's Forge, all hell breaks loose. Literally, it's a magical trap. Chains just start ensnaring everybody. And in the midst of all of this, Torvaz looks over because Dr. Doom's spells don't work on these chains, right? He says, we were blessed with Steve Rogers' powers of righteousness, which we will need more of. And that is when Hell's Forger appears, right? Who dares approach my forge? And Torvaz says, I am Torvaz, the preacher. I beseech you, Barthand the Smith, to give us aid. And Doom's like, or suffer the consequences. Which is like the most Dr. Doom statement, right? But because Steve Rogers was able to break them out, again, with effectively divine power, he talks about having a need to diffuse the situation, that this can get out of hand very, very fast. And so Steve just says, we've come for the anti-divine. We represent the souls of hell, seeking to give them power over their own destinies, and we would do the same for you. And the response is, my destiny is this, and yours is to be split in two. And with the biggest axe I've ever seen, he comes down on this thing with Steve Rogers, and Steve stops it with his bare hands. Divine enchantment, right? And he says, whatever is giving me this strength, these new abilities, I just hope it lasts long enough to get me back home and to my friends, to Sharon. And that's where the question is asked, who are you? Right? And Victor just shows up and says, you're doomed, right? And immediately launches an attack. And so Steve gets his hands on the weapon, right? Just this massive battle axe. But that's again where this idea of a prophecy comes into play, because when Steve goes towards cutting essentially the access point to the anti-divine, Dr. Doom seeks to take it for himself. And that's where he's told, the power, it's not for you. But Doom's response, all power is Doom's power. The problem is that once the access point is created, there's a person standing there that Doom immediately recognizes and says, yes, Victor, so you do recognize your lost love, the woman you sacrificed to hell for magical powers. It turns out that Frenza is actually Valeria von Frazen. We covered this story. Funny enough, Marvel actually lists it wrong. They call it Fantastic Four, issue number 67. That comic is about the first appearance of Adam Warlock. I know it because I own it. It's actually Fantastic Four, volume 3, issue number 67. I love when I can throw out these little tidbits. But this is a story where Dr. Doom quite literally sacrificed her and then turned her skin into a new suit of armor for himself. It was kind of wild, but she is here waiting on him because, like any woman scorned, she's come for her revenge, and I promise you, I feel like she's gonna get it. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I love this story. I think it's incredible. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.